welcome to the historic Guildhall here in the heart of the City of London, where in the next half an hour we will find out who has won one of the world's most important and most famous literary prizes, the Man Booker. Welcome to all of you. It's been quite a journey to get to this point. The judges considered 155 books. They were whittled down to a long list of 13, a short list of 6, and tonight there will be one book left, just one winner. This is a real highlight of the literary calendar. 500 guests have been enjoying a champagne reception and a 3-course dinner, and among them, the 6 writers shortlisted for the prize this year. What a nerve-wracking evening it must be for them, waiting nervously to find out if they've won, and who knows, even beginning to think about the £50,000 cheque that goes with winning. And we have a royal guest with us tonight as well. Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Cornwall will be presenting the trophy to the winner. Well, to help guide us through the proceedings, I'm delighted to say that we're joined by 2 former judges. Sarah Churchwell, Professor of Public Humanities and American Literature at the University of London, welcome to you, and the writer and critic Alex Clark. Thank you as well. Much to discuss, I'm really looking forward to it. But before that, let's just remind you, who is on this year's shortlist?
This year the 6 nominees are The Sellout by Paul Beatty, about a young black man in Los Angeles who decides to reinstate slavery and racial segregation. His Bloody Project by Graeme Macrae Burnet. It tells the story of 3 brutal murders in the Scottish Highlands. Hot Milk explores the toxic relationship between a mother and her daughter. Its author, Deborah Levy, is the only writer this year to have been nominated before. The psychological thriller Eileen is the first novel from Ottessa Moshfegh. It's about an unhappy young woman in 1960s New England. David Soloy's All That Man Is a series of separate but linked stories about 9 men of different nationalities. And Madeleine Thien's epic Do Not Say We Have Nothing follows the fortunes of 3 musicians through political upheaval in China.
So it's an intriguing mix of historical drama, thrillers, crime. There's even some comedy in there as well. And the writers, 2 from Britain, 2 from America, and 2 who were born from Canada. So, Sarah, how strong a shortlist do you think it is this year?
Well, look, I am a little bit biased in the sense of I'm somebody who thinks that it has been very good for the prize that it has expanded its boundaries. So as a North American, I like hearing North American voices. I like reading North American perspectives. But that said, I genuinely think this is a very, very strong shortlist. I really do. There are some remarkable books. And one of the things that I think is the most exciting about this is that with the exception of Eleanor Levy, who some people know from her previous shortlisting, most of these writers will be totally unknown to the general public. And that is what these kinds of prizes, especially this prize, are meant to do and can do. And it's really exciting that it's taken the opportunity to do that.
Alex, when you've been covering this prize for as long as I have, quite often there is a front runner. There's a book that stands head and shoulders above the rest. I don't think that's really the case this year.
I think people tend to gravitate towards Deborah Levy because she has been shortlisted before and not very long ago, and because she is essentially one of the only really well-known writers on the shortlist. But no, I think that's absolutely true. There's nothing that we can really pick out as the obvious. Mind you, when you do pick out something obvious, it never wins. It's always a surprise.
Well, let's look in a little bit more detail now, and we're going to start with His Bloody Project by Graeme Macrae Burnet. Now, in some ways, this book has already won. It's a bestseller. It's selling twice as many copies as the other books on the shortlist, and it's a novel with a crime at its heart. And crime novels don't tend to feature on literary prize shortlists, Sarah. So why do you think it's made it?
Well, look, I think it absolutely deserves to have made it. And I think that the way that Graeme Macrae Burnet talks about it, he says it's not a crime novel. It's a novel with crime at its center. And I think that way of putting it, he's absolutely right to suggest that this is, we are too limited in our ideas that there's such a thing as genre fiction and literary fiction. I genuinely agree with him that that's a foolish way of looking at it. I think there are good books and not good books. And this is a very good book that happens to be about a crime. One of the reasons why I think it has made the list is because it is a crime told from multiple perspectives through a historical lens. And what he's really doing is raising questions about the big postmodern questions about how do we know what the truth is? How do we know whether we trust somebody's perspective or not? But it's beyond one unreliable narrator. He's got 6 or 7 unreliable narrators. And in that sense, it's a very, it's in the company of people like Faulkner, trying to say, how can we access truth through memory? How do we know what really happened? And this is a book that wants to ask those big questions.
And that's the point, isn't it, Alex? It's not a whodunit, it's a why-done-it, if there is such a
We know
phrase.
who's done it. I mean, we think it's possible, I suppose, that there may be a twist and we find out he didn't do it at all. But essentially, he admits on the first day that this guy in the 1860s, very young man with a very troubled family background in a remote part of Rossshire, off he goes and he slaughters the sort of enemy of his family. And the very interesting thing that happens in the book is this portrait of a tiny community and the strictures that are being placed on it. And it's sort of a little bit about the coming of modernity, about the coming of old ways being parcelled up in legalistic terms.
And it's about the debates then in the point of view that comes about because of that. Because when this violent occurrence happens, and then you have the kind of official narratives, and then the unofficial narratives that are the narratives of the people in the community who live with it. And there is that part of the conflict of the book is the conflict between this official, and it's a very English point of view, and then the Scottish people who are there, living with it.
Okay, we've got to move on. Sorry.
We could go
only a
on
limited
for
amount
hours.
of time. Clearly, you've got a lot to say about this novel. Let's move on to the first American of 2 on the shortlist this year, Paul Beatty's novel, The Sellout. Now, this is, well, he said to me, it's a difficult book to digest. It's looking at racial politics in contemporary America, but it's funny. Did it make you laugh?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hoot. You're immediately sort of brought in, partly because it's a sort of incredibly digressive novel. It references Dickens pretty early on because it's set in a vanished community called Dickens on the outskirts of Los Angeles. But it also has quite a lot of Tristram Shandy, of Lawrence Stern about it. It's a narrator who is endlessly going off, telling the story of his life, his birth, his life, and what happens to him later, but in these extraordinarily mazy ways. And what it has is an outrageous proposition at its heart. And the outrageous proposition is that a black man will, in fact, reinstitute slavery and segregation in a Los Angeles suburb. And, once you start with that...
Sorry, I was just going to add that the twist on that is that that's outrageous enough, but then the further twist is that it's better for black people when he does that because it exposes racism. So he keeps twisting the knife.
Okay, we've got to move on, I'm afraid. David Szallay's All That Man Is. Now, David Szalay, born in Canada, raised in Britain, now lives in Hungary. And this, Sarah, is a series of 9 separate but interlinked short stories examining modern masculinity. The big question is, does it add up to a novel?
I think that is a big question, and some people have suggested that that's a slightly academic question. But, as a former judge, we're both former judges, the rules of the prize are very clear. It is about novels, and interlinked short stories are a different thing from novels. So the question to me is, how do you decide what's the boundary between a collection of short stories and a novel? For me, it's when those short stories create enough of a kind of collective identity that something bigger happens across the course of the book than in the individual stories. And therefore, I think it's not just an academic question because it gets to the heart of what is a novel supposed to do and what is a novel supposed to be. And he's taking that challenge on, but it's a very big challenge. To my mind, the only book before this that could even claim to have done that is Ernest Hemingway's first book, In Our Time. So he is taking on a very big challenger indeed to say that this is a collection of short stories that can also read properly like a great novel, and it's a big claim.
You're calling David Szalay the heir to Hemingway.
I'm saying he is staking that ground.
I sense you disagree slightly.
I think, one of those academic voices, one of those people who suggested it was academic to worry about whether it was a novel rather than a collection of short stories, because I think those boundaries are ever more porous and should be encouraged by a prize like this to be so, because if we're going to have a prize that's rewarding ambition, that's dissolving boundaries, that's looking further afield and is trying to get people to discover, I think those unities of what a novel is don't really or shouldn't really apply any longer.
Of course, the word novel means new, right? Yes. So it's meant to keep pushing the boundaries, and that's true.
Well, let's move on to the second American on the shortlist this year, Ottessa Moshfegh. Now, she's also the youngest writer on the shortlist. She's only 35, and she's been shortlisted for her first novel, Eileen, which is a psychological thriller about a young woman who wants to escape from New England. I should just say the formal proceedings of the evening are about to start behind us, but we are going to carry on chatting for a bit if that's all right.
It makes us seem very rude.
Yeah, no, but we're not being rude. Alex, how much of an achievement was this for a first novel?
Well, I have to say, I find it quite hard to read without knowing some of the sort of paraphernalia around it, which is, in interview, Ottessa Moshfegh has said she got a book to teach her how to write a novel in 90 days, and she did so because she wanted to bring her work to a wider audience, and also to use the tropes of crime fiction and thriller fiction. People have compared this a little bit to Patricia Highsmith. I spot a bit of Shirley Jackson in there. There's also a bit of Plath. But, you know, before she wrote this debut novel, she's a highly accomplished novella and short story writer, to go back to that question of form. I'm sidestepping the question of whether I think this is successful. It's, for me, possibly compromised a little. I couldn't quite get on board with it.
What did you make of the character of Eileen? Because she's rather sour and difficult. Does she add up to a full literary creation?
I think that's a really good question. And I think she's a deliberately unpleasant character who's upfront about her own unpleasantness. But then a novel has to give you something else that compensates for the fact that you're dealing with an unsympathetic character. And I think when you don't have a great, you know, linguistic tour de force, when you don't have a plot that is absolutely kind of, you know, keeps you just, you know, so gripped in turning the pages. And it's got a strong plot, and it's got strong characterization. But I agree, I think it's a very promising first novel. But I'm excited to see what she does next. And I would be less likely to put my money on this book.
There's certainly a great control of atmosphere. We could
in fairness to her, she has said she doesn't think this is her best book, and she'd quite like to win for the next one, but not for this one. We will see.
She wouldn't give the money back.
Let's move on now to Deborah Levy's book, Hot Milk. Now, she is the second Briton on the shortlist this year. She's the most established. She's been shortlisted before for Swimming Home in 2012. And this is set in the sweltering sun of southern Spain, and it explores this fraught relationship between a mother and a daughter. Did you enjoy it, Sarah?
I really wanted to enjoy this book. There's a lot in it to admire. For me, it didn't quite come to life in the way that I wanted to. I kept sort of seeing ideas on the page. That said, I think, to go back to the point about weather, she creates weather. She creates a mood, an atmosphere, this lowering sense of emotional constriction and a kind of asphyxia between this mother and this daughter that is very, very effective. Ultimately, for me, I'm not sure it's Deborah Levy's best work, but I think there's a lot in it to admire.
It's interesting what you say about that, because she was a theatre director, and she does create these really vivid scenes on the page, doesn't she?
I love this book, and I think I was gripped the minute I started reading it, and I think what did it for me was this relationship between mother and daughter, so painful, so compromised. As I think the heroine says, the narrator says, you know, she's trying to solve the mystery of her mother. It's a detective story, and to set that against this kind of strangely mythological landscape, I think was just fantastic.
Well, from the shortest book on the list this year to the longest, Do Not Say We Have Nothing, by the Canadian writer Madeleine, Thien, a vast, sprawling book examining decades of Chinese history. 500 or so pages. Alex, when you get to the end, has it been worth it?
Actually, the end is really extraordinary and very, very brilliant. I, at first, had some reservations, not because of the subject matter, not because of the characterizations, but that structure of constantly going back, of setting a sort of shadow story alongside a kind of interspersed main narrative. There are moments when I think that creaks slightly, but overall I think the kind of emotion of it, and also the fact that she talks about music as another language that you can use when you can't use an official language, I found was immensely ambitious.
She does weave music through the book like a soundtrack, doesn't she? Did it work for you?
Absolutely. This, for me, was the revelation of the shortlist. I didn't know Madeleine Thien's work, and I agree there are bits where I think, you know, there are things where if I were an editor, I might say, you know, do this differently or do that differently. But overall, I thought thought it was a really remarkable book, not just about the language of music as a language, but about translating Chinese and American, or English, but North American, but the movement, and then math. The main narrator is a mathematician, and she talks about the language of math, and it's a book about language. It's a book about translation. It's a book about how you understand yourself in these different stories. And it manages to cut back and forth between Tiananmen Square and the Mao Revolution in a way that, and about women, in a way that I found really, really affecting.
So, quick prediction, do I take it you think that will win?
Oh no, it would be the one I would vote for, but I don't think it will win. My heart says Thien, but my head says Szalay.
Alex, quick prediction from you.
I am split between Thien and Levy for my possible
You're
winners.
both sitting on the fence.
I know.
We will see.
I'm going with Szalay.
Okay,
I think Szalay
we'll
will
see.
win, but I would vote for Thien.
All right, let's see. Well, look, let's join the chair of the judges now, Dr. Amanda Foreman.
Agreements, just a shared commitment to excellence. When Tom Maschler founded the Booker in 1968, he said he wanted to create a prize that would stimulate interest in serious fiction. But behind that seemingly simple and innocuous statement was something profound, and you might even call it subversive, because fiction is freedom. To quote Ursula Le Guin, the imagination is truly the enemy of bigotry and dogma. And what we have in our 6 shortlisted books is proof that an unfettered imagination, one that is free to explore the outer bounds of the human condition, is the sine qua non, not just of good writing, but of all writing. The truth is rarely pretty, and it is never comfortable. In Paul Beatty's The Sellout, we have an anti-hero whose absurdist attempts to resurrect segregation are painfully funny, with the emphasis on both painful and funny. In Deborah Levy's Hot Milk, we have a fearless expose of monstrous mothers and feckless daughters in prose that revels in the sheer complexity and danger of the feminine. Graeme Macrae Burnet's His Bloody Project goes into the mind of a young murderer in order to explore where the true destroyers of humanity reside. Ottessa Moshfegh's Eileen invites the reader to experience a young woman's rebirth from victim to avenger through the glorious technicolor reality of blood, vomit, and alcohol. David Szalai's All That Man Is dares his reader to re-examine the masculine in a world that has become unmoored from everything, and every person is an outlier, an outcast, or an outsider. And in Madeleine Thien's Do Not Say We Have Nothing, we have a fictional tale about what is very real indeed, the deep poison of totalitarianism and its existential threat to the human spirit. My friends, by being here tonight for the Man Booker Prize, we are part of a global vanguard that stands against all threats, both political and practical, to the freedom of writers to write, the freedom of novels to be literary, and the freedom of people everywhere to read them. Please join me now in celebration. The winner of the 2016 Man Booker Prize for Fiction is The Sellout by Paul Beatty.
Beatty makes Man Booker Prize history by becoming the first American to win the prize in its 48-year history. They're being congratulated by Deborah Levy, one of his fellow nominees. He wins it for a truly American novel, The Sellout. This is a book which explores race relations in modern America and tells the story of a young black man in Los Angeles who tries to reintroduce racial segregation.
Oh, man. As usual, I'm woefully unprepared. But, yeah, I think I am unprepared, but I pretend a lot. And Deborah was saying something in Cheltenham about being lost. And it's something that I love being lost. You know, it's the only place I get, it's the only time I get anywhere. And I'm sorry. Yeah, I wasn't expecting this, I have to say. Give me a second, sorry. I can't tell you guys, like, how long of a journey this has been for me. Sarah, my agent, has known me for 20 years, at least. And I don't want to, like, get all dramatic, writing saved my life or anything like that, but writing's given me a life. And I had all these things, can I talk about the book for 1 second, I guess? I did a reading in Detroit at a college, small college, and they did a little get-together in my honor, and with some city kids, and I had to give a formal reading like this. I wasn't dressed as formally. But I started reading, and I couldn't get to the second paragraph of the book, and I just started crying. Like, I couldn't stop crying. That's my girlfriend, Althea. I'll get to you in a second, Althea, I'm sorry. And it was, and so, I mean, this went on for 5 minutes, and I was like, yeah, I gotta tell him why I'm crying. I didn't really know. And so I finally got some semblance of composure. And I said, you know, as hard as I work on everything I've ever written, when I heard that book out loud, it was the first time I read it out loud or really read it, you know? And I was like, oh my goodness, it matches exactly the language in my head and the music in my head. I mean, I just didn't know it until I said it out loud. Of course, I couldn't read. But I wouldn't be here with this book without Althea. Her name's Althea Wasso. She means everything to me. And I'm not lazy. I just don't commit too much, because if I commit to something, I do it. And so I'd been avoiding writing this book. And this organization in the States called Creative Capital, they were basically asking me to take their money, and I didn't want to do it because the application was too long. And I just didn't want to write. I hate writing. I just didn't want to write. But Althea made me do it. She was like, they're giving you money, you have to take it. And so I did it, and I just, I wrote 9 little sentences, and it's not what the book is, but it made me actually have to force myself to put this book together. And so there's a bunch of people I have to thank. I have to thank Sarah Chalfant. Althea I've already thanked. I have to thank my mom, of course. My editor, Colin Dickerman at FSG, he just tells me the right thing to say. I've been working with him for a long time, 15 years or so maybe, I don't know, somewhere in there, close to that. And I just give him a jumble of, I don't know what it is, and he just says, Paul, write the story. And then I know what I have to do, and I'm deeply thankful to him for that. Yeah, this is so weird. This is not me up here. I don't even know who this is. It's so crazy. And I guess I have to talk about this a little bit. Oh, I forgot to thank Juliet. I don't know what's true and what's not true. But yeah, this is too straight for you, Juliet. That says something about you. And beyond the taste, I think it says something about the risk that you're willing to take. And so, I mean, this is a hard book. It was hard for me to write. I know it's hard to read. You know, everyone's coming at it from different angles. Sarah's having a hard time pushing the book, I know. And Juliet was the only person I think, I don't know what I'm, you know, but I think, thank you, Juliet. What can I say? You took the chance, and look what happened. And yeah.
Well, we're going to have to leave Paul Beatty there. Clearly very emotional and an unexpected win, I think, for him. But he becomes the first American winner of the Man Booker Prize in its 48-year history. And that is for his novel, The Sellout. It took him 7 years to write it. It's his 4th novel, and it examines race relations in modern America today. From all of us here at the Guildhall, thank you for watching. Goodbye.